Welcome back to our tutorial series, and in this lesson we're actually going to be styling the span tag that we put inside of our paragraphs that are in our document. So in this lesson we'll set up the styling for our span tags. The span tag is used to group inline elements inside of our document. The span tag itself has no impact on the visual representation of the document unless you add styling to the tag itself. So I can have span tags scattered all over my document unless I actually go in and I'll assign them a class or an inline style. They're going to have no impact on the document itself. Span tags are used quite often in HTML to bring attention to particular portions of our content area. And we do. As HTML developers, we use them a lot to bring attention to certain areas of the document or certain areas of the content that we want noticed or we want to stand out. And you're going to see that as we set up these styles. So let's move into our development environment and set up the span tags that we've got inside of our document. So I'm going to go ahead and drop out of the presentation, get into my development environment, and we have scattered span tags throughout these paragraphs. So in this lesson, we'll look at those span elements that we added to our paragraphs at the beginning of the tutorial. Span elements are used to style inline elements that can add impact to your HTML page. We added a few span elements to our document when we laid out the HTML structure, so let's style those now. But first, again, let me explain to you what they're used for. The span tag is used to group inline elements in a document. You'll notice I've got an opening span tag there and a closing span tag. So what I'm doing is I'm grouping these elements inside my paragraph tag, and I'm setting them aside so that I can actually do things with them individually. The same with this group. Each one of our paragraphs has a couple of these span elements in them so that we can actually set up styling for them. If I look at the page right now, they have no impact on my content. You can't tell where those span elements are unless I actually viewed the source of the page. Then you'd actually see them in there, but again, they're not having any visual representation yet. So what I want to do is let's go scroll up to our first set of span tags, and I want to give this first tag a class called highlight. So I'm just going to say class highlight, and I'm going to go ahead and copy that class because I'm actually going to assign this to a couple of our span tags. So I'm just going to do Control-C on the PC, Command-C on the Mac, and I'm going to come down to my second paragraph, and I'm going to go ahead and add this class here. And I'm going to come down to my third paragraph and add this class here. So now I've got three span elements with a class of highlight. So now what I want to do, let's go ahead and save all those changes. Go ahead and add that class to a few of your span elements because we're actually going to do a couple different ways of doing this. I'm going to go into my main.css and I'm going to scroll up till I can get to where my highlight would be, and it's going to be right above my left, and I'm going to say highlight. Open and close my curly braces, and again I'm just identifying the class that we just set up. And now I'm just going to add a couple of properties and values to this. I'm going to give it a line height of 20 pixels. That's going to make it a little bit higher than the standard text. And then I'm going to give it a background color of #FF9. And that's actually a very nice yellow. I'm going to go ahead and save all those changes. Good time for you to pause to put those in your code. And now I'm going to refresh my browser window, and you'll notice now I've got highlighting across that text that we actually use the span element on, because we're actually singling that text out as something special by using that span element. And when I added the class to it, it actually allows me to go in and set those up any way I want. And I could put any values and properties in there that I wanted to that pertain to that text. We're going to do another example. I'm just going to go ahead and add another class inside my paragraphs. Let me go back to index.html. And then some of the span elements that I haven't assigned a class to, I'm going to say class equals, and I'm just going to have this one say standout. And I'm going to go ahead and copy that class, and let's go assign that to a couple of my span elements that are in my document that have not been assigned a class. I've got two of them right there. And by the way, you could have multiple classes on these span elements also. I'm normally only use one. In fact, most of us only use one when we do this, but you could have multiple classes on the span elements also. So I'm going to go ahead and save those changes. So now I've got a class called standout that I've actually added to a couple of my paragraphs inside the span elements. I'm going to go back into my main.css file. I'm going to scroll down to my S area for standout, and I'm going to say standout. Open and close my curly braces, and now let's change the font family. I'm going to give this a font family. I'm just going to copy this so you don't have to watch me type it. because that's just insane. And I'm going to give it a font family of Tahoma, Geneva, Sans Serif. So we're actually going to change the default font for this particular group, this particular span. I'm going to give it a font size of 14 pixels. I'm going to come down and give it a font style of italic. I want to give it a color, and let's give it a color of pound F00. And below the color, I'm going to give it a letter spacing of 2 pixels. That's actually going to space our characters a little bit farther apart. Not a lot, but a little. I'm going to give it a padding of 0 top and bottom, but 5 pixels left and right. And that's just going to give it a little separation. These sentences will have a little bit more separation inside my paragraph, left and right, than they would in the normal document flow. So I'm going to say save those changes. Great time for you to pause to put that code in your CSS file. I'm going to go ahead and refresh our browser window, and now you'll see that I've changed the text color, the style, I've made it italic, so that text is really standing out now in those paragraphs. Now, would I actually set it up like this in real life? Probably not, because it looks a little squirrely to me. It's a little bit too big. I don't like the color because it doesn't flow with the site, but the point is to give you an idea of how you can use those span elements. But again, as you're setting up your pages, try to keep your colors working together and try to keep your styles working together. And using a Tahoma font with these particular, Tahoma and Geneva font with these particular font styles doesn't look great. But again, it's to show you how we can actually set these up. You can play around with different font styles. You can play around with a whole bunch of different things as you set up your page. I just wanted you to see how we can use span elements inside of our page.